They say the worst kind of prison ain't got bars. It's when your own mind keeps replaying the moment your whole life got stolen from you, over and over, like a song you can't turn off. I was 19 years old when they put handcuffs on me in the back of a squad car, my hands shaking so bad I could barely feel the metal. The blue and red lights were spinning across the brick walls of Harrison Hall, our dorm building at Morehouse College in Atlanta, Georgia. Students I'd sat with in the cafeteria just hours before were standing on the lawn in their pajamas, pointing at me, whispering. Some were crying. My roommate Marcus was dead, stabbed 7 times in our room while I was supposedly sleeping 3 feet away. And everyone, the police, the dean, even some of my own friends, believed I did it. But here's what nobody knew that night. The real killer was standing right there in that crowd, watching me get taken away, probably thanking God I was too scared and too young to know what questions to ask. That man owed Marcus $2,000, and he'd rather see me rot in prison than pay back what he borrowed. If you've ever been blamed for something you didn't do, if you've ever felt the world turn its back on you when you needed it most, then maybe you'll understand what I'm about to tell you. Before we go any further, do me a favor. Hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. And drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. It matters to me. It reminds me that my story traveled further than those prison walls ever could. My name is Vernon James Carter. I'm 73 years old now, sitting here in a small house in Oakland, California, with my granddaughter's kids running around in the next room. But back then in 1971, I was just a kid from Birmingham, Alabama, who'd made it to college on a partial scholarship and a whole lot of hope. I thought education was my way out. Turns out, it almost became my way into a nightmare I'm still waking up from. This is that story. Every word of it is true. The first time I met Marcus Wellington, he was trying to fix a broken record player in our dorm room with a butter knife and pure determination. It was August 1970, move-in day at Morehouse College, and the Georgia heat was so thick you could almost see it hanging in the air. I walked into room 214 of Harrison Hall, carrying 2 suitcases my mama had packed with everything I owned, 3 pairs of jeans, 5 shirts, some underwear, a Bible she'd made me promise to read, and a photograph of her and my little sister Rosetta standing in front of our house on Jefferson Avenue. The house wasn't much, just a shotgun rental with peeling paint. But in that picture, they were smiling like we'd won the lottery. Getting into Morehouse was our lottery. I was the first person in my family to go to college, and Mama worked double shifts at the textile mill to help me get there. I wasn't about to let her down. Marcus looked up when I walked in. This tall, light-skinned brother with an afro pick stuck in his hair and the kind of smile that made you want to trust him immediately. "You must be Vernon," he said, wiping his hands on his jeans. "I'm Marcus. Sorry about the mess. I'm trying to get this turntable working before my records get here. You like Marvin Gaye?" I nodded, setting my suitcases down on the empty bed by the window. The room was small, maybe 12 by 15 feet, with 2 twin beds, 2 desks, and a shared closet that looked like it couldn't fit both our belongings, even if we tried. But it was mine. Ours. And for a kid from Birmingham who'd shared a bedroom with his sister his whole life, it felt like a palace. Marcus went back to fiddling with the record player, and I started unpacking. Neither of us talking much, but both of us aware we were about to spend the next 9 months living 3 feet apart. You learn a lot about a person when you share a room that small. By the end of that first week, Marcus and I had fallen into an easy rhythm. He was pre-med, I was studying business, and we both had 8 a.m. morning classes that forced us to wake up before the sun came up. Marcus was from Atlanta, grew up in a nice house in the West End with 2 parents who were both teachers. His daddy taught history at Booker T. Washington High School, and his mama taught English at Spelman College, just down the street. They'd raised Marcus to be disciplined, focused, and generous, maybe too generous. He had this way of seeing the best in people, even when they didn't deserve it. He'd lend you his last dollar and tell you to pay him back whenever you could. He'd stay up late helping you study for a test, even when he had his own exam the next morning. He was the kind of person who made you want to be better just by being around him. We'd stay up late some nights, talking about everything, our dreams, our fears, girls we were too nervous to talk to, the weight of being young black men in the South in 1970. Sometimes we'd hear sirens outside and the room would get quiet, both of us knowing that out there, beyond these campus gates, the world wasn't always kind to people who looked like us. One night in September, about a month into the semester, Marcus and I were studying for midterms when someone knocked on our door. It was after 10 p.m., and most people were either in bed or at the library. Marcus opened the door, and there stood this short, stocky guy with a round face and nervous eyes. His name was Leonard Hayes, but everyone called him Lenny. He lived 2 floors above us in room 414, and I'd seen him around campus a few times, always by himself, always looking like he was in a hurry to get somewhere. "Marcus, man, I need a favor," Lenny said, not even looking at me. Marcus stepped aside and let him in. Lenny glanced around the room like he was checking to make sure no one else was listening. "I need to borrow some money, just for a couple weeks. My financial aid got delayed and I can't pay for my meal plan. I'll pay you back as soon as the check comes through, I promise." Marcus didn't even hesitate. He went to his desk drawer, pulled out a small metal box, and counted out $40 in cash. I watched the whole thing, feeling uneasy, but not knowing why. "You sure about this?" I asked Marcus after Lenny left. Marcus just shrugged, that easy smile on his face. "He'll pay me back. Besides, we got to look out for each other, right? That's what we're here for." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that's how the world worked. You help people, they help you back, and everybody makes it through. But something about the way Lenny took that money, the way he didn't meet Marcus's eyes when he said thank you, made my stomach twist. I should have said more. I should have told Marcus to be careful. But I was 19 years old and didn't know yet that some people see kindness as weakness, that some people will smile in your face and stab you in the back the moment you turn around. If I'd known then what I know now, maybe none of this would have happened. Maybe Marcus would still be alive. Maybe I would have had a different life. October came and the leaves on campus started turning gold and red, making Morehouse look like something out of a postcard. Marcus and I had settled into our routine. Morning classes, afternoon study sessions at the library, evenings at the cafeteria where we'd sit with other freshmen and talk about nothing and everything. There was this girl Marcus liked. Her name was Denise, and she went to Spelman. She had dark skin that seemed to glow in the sunlight and wore her hair in 2 afro puffs that bounced when she walked. Marcus would turn into a completely different person around her. Stammering, nervous, fumbling over his words, like someone had stolen his confidence. I'd tease him about it, and he'd throw a pillow at me and tell me to mind my business. Those were good days. Simple days. The kind you don't appreciate until they're gone and you'd give anything to have them back, even for just an hour. But Lenny never paid Marcus back. 2 weeks turned into 3, then 4. Every time Marcus saw him on campus, Lenny would have some excuse. The check was coming next week. There was a delay at the financial aid office. His mama was supposed to send money, but it hadn't arrived yet. Marcus would just nod and say, "It's cool, man, whenever you can." But I could see it was bothering him more than he let on. $40 doesn't sound like much now, but back then, for college students scraping by, it was groceries for 2 weeks. It was laundry money and bus fare and the difference between eating well and eating cheap. I'd watch Marcus count the money in his metal box, doing the math in his head, figuring out how to make it stretch. One night he admitted to me that he'd been skipping lunch some days to save money. That's when I got mad. "You need to get your money back from Lenny," I told Marcus. We were in our room, books spread out on our beds, pretending to study, but really just tired of pretending everything was fine. "I mean it, Marcus. That dude is playing you." Marcus looked uncomfortable, like he didn't want to believe someone would actually do that to him. Maybe he really is having trouble with his financial aid. You know how slow that office is. I sat up and looked at him dead in his eyes. Or maybe he just doesn't want to pay you back. You ever think of that? Some people will take advantage of kindness, Marcus. You're too trusting. He didn't say anything for a long time. just stared at his textbook like the words might give him an answer. Finally, he sighed. I'll talk to him. I'll ask him what's really going on. But I'm not going to be aggressive about it, Vernon. That's not who I am. And that was the problem. Marcus was too good, too forgiving, too willing to believe the best in people. I loved him for it, but I also knew the world would eat him alive for it. The next day, Marcus tracked down Lenny at the student union. I wasn't there, but Marcus told me about it later that night. He'd found Lenny sitting at a table by himself, eating a sandwich and reading a magazine. When Marcus approached and brought up the money, Lenny's whole demeanor changed. His face got tight, defensive. I told you I'd pay you back, Lenny said, not even looking up from his magazine. You think I'm trying to steal from you or something? Marcus tried to stay calm, explaining that he wasn't accusing him of anything. He just really needed the money back because his own funds were running low. That's when Lenny stood up, and his voice got loud enough that other students started looking over. You know what, Marcus? Maybe I misjudged you. I thought you were cool, but you're just like everyone else. Always worried about money. Always keeping score. I'll get you your money when I get it, and if that's not good enough, then too bad. Marcus came back to our room that night looking defeated. He sat on his bed and put his head in his hands, and I could tell he was questioning himself, wondering if he'd been wrong to ask for his own money back. Don't do that, I said. Don't let him make you feel guilty for wanting what's yours. He's the one who borrowed it. He's the one who's been avoiding you. Marcus nodded, but I could see he was still torn. The thing about people like Marcus is they don't understand people like Lenny. They can't imagine someone looking them in the eye, taking their help, and then turning around and treating them like the enemy for asking for it back. Over the next few weeks, Lenny started avoiding us completely. If he saw us in the hallway, he'd turn around and go the other way. If we walked into the cafeteria and he was there, he'd leave. It was like he was punishing Marcus for daring to ask for his money. And that $40, it grew into something bigger. Marcus mentioned to me one night that Lenny had actually borrowed more, another $60 a couple weeks after the first time. He'd never told me about it, probably because he knew I'd get upset. So now Lenny owed Marcus $100 total, and from the looks of it, he had no intention of ever paying it back. November rolled in cold and gray, the kind of weather that makes you want to stay inside and forget the world exists. Thanksgiving break was coming up, and most students were planning to go home to see their families. I was going back to Birmingham for 4 days, and Marcus was heading to his parents' house here in Atlanta. We were both looking forward to it. A break from classes, a break from campus drama, a break from Lenny Hayes and his excuses. But 2 weeks before break, something happened that changed everything. Marcus and I were walking back to our dorm after an evening class when we saw Lenny in the parking lot, leaning against a brand new Chevrolet Impala. It was dark blue, shiny, with chrome rims that caught the streetlight. Lenny was laughing with 2 other guys, showing off the car like he just won it in a contest. Marcus stopped walking. I felt his whole body tense up beside me. "Is that Lenny's car?" he asked, his voice quiet but sharp. I looked closer and saw the temporary dealer tags in the back window. "Looks like it," I said. We stood there for a moment, just watching. One of the guys with Lenny was asking how much he paid for it, and Lenny was grinning, saying something about getting a good deal, how his uncle helped him with the down payment. Marcus's jaw clenched. I could see the gears turning in his head. Lenny claimed he couldn't afford to eat, claimed his financial aid was delayed, claimed he didn't have money to pay back the $100 he owed, but somehow he had enough money to buy a car, a new car. "Vernon," Marcus said, his voice shaking now, "that's my money. That's my money he's driving around in." I didn't know what to say. What could I say? We both knew it was true. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. I could hear him tossing and turning in his bed, sighing every few minutes, the anger and betrayal keeping him awake. Around 2 a.m, he finally spoke into the darkness. "I feel like an idiot." I turned over to face his side of the room. "You're not an idiot. You tried to help someone. That's not your fault." But Marcus wasn't having it. I should have seen it coming. The way he acted when I asked for the money back, the way he's been avoiding me, He never had any intention of paying me. And now he's out there driving a new car while I'm skipping meals. How stupid can I be? I wanted to tell him he wasn't stupid, that Lenny was just a manipulative liar who'd taken advantage of his kindness. But I also knew that sometimes people need to feel their anger, need to sit in it until they figure out what to do with it. So I just let him talk. He went on for another hour, letting it all out. His frustration, his disappointment, his growing resentment, not just toward Lenny, but toward himself for being so trusting. The next morning, Marcus did something I'd never seen him do before. He went looking for Lenny, and this time he wasn't polite about it. He found him outside the library, talking to some girl, and Marcus walked right up and interrupted them. "We need to talk," Marcus said, his voice firm. Lenny looked annoyed, like Marcus was bothering him on purpose. "About what?" he said. "About the $100 you owe me. The $100 you said you didn't have. The same $100 you apparently had enough of to buy a car." The girl Lenny was talking to looked uncomfortable and walked away. Lenny's face turned red. "That's none of your business how I got that car. My uncle helped me. You think you're the only person I know? You think the world revolves around you?" Marcus stepped closer. "I want my money back, this week, all of it." Lenny laughed, but it wasn't a friendly laugh. It was cold, mean. "Or what? You gonna beat me up? You gonna tell the dean? Go ahead. See if I care. You'll get your money when I feel like giving it to you." I wasn't there when this happened, but Marcus told me about it later, and I could see how shaken he was. He wasn't used to confrontation, wasn't used to people disrespecting him so openly. And Lenny knew it. He knew Marcus was too decent, too well raised to actually do anything aggressive. So he pushed and pushed, knowing Marcus would eventually back down. But here's what neither of them knew. When you push a good man too far, when you take his kindness and throw it back in his face, something inside him breaks. Not in a violent way, but in a permanent way. Marcus stopped talking about Lenny after that, stopped mentioning the money, but I could see it eating at him. He'd sit at his desk, staring at nothing, his jaw tight. He'd skip more meals, not because he couldn't afford them, but because he'd lost his appetite. And at night, when he thought I was asleep, I'd hear him crying quietly into his pillow. That's what betrayal does to you. It hollows you out from the inside. And I had no idea that in just 3 weeks, that hollow feeling would turn into something none of us could have predicted. I didn't know that the anger building in Lenny Hayes was about to explode. And I didn't know that I was about to lose my roommate forever. December 3rd, 1971. That's the date burned into my memory like a brand. It was a Friday night, cold enough that you could see your breath when you stepped outside. Finals were 2 weeks away, and the whole campus was in study mode. Library packed, dorm rooms lit up past midnight, everyone stressed and caffeinated and running on fumes. Marcus and I had spent most of the day in the library, cramming for our respective exams. He had a big biology test coming up, and I had an accounting final that I was terrified of failing. By 9 o'clock that night, we were both exhausted. We grabbed some food from the cafeteria, chicken, rice, and green beans that tasted like cardboard, and headed back to Harrison Hall. The walk from the cafeteria to our dorm was only about 5 minutes, but it felt longer that night. The campus was quiet, most students already inside, and there was this heavy feeling in the air, like something bad was waiting to happen. When we got back to room 214, Marcus sat at his desk and opened his biology textbook. I kicked off my shoes and lay down on my bed, telling myself I'd just rest my eyes for 20 minutes before getting back to studying. That's the last normal moment I remember. The last time everything felt like it was going to be okay. Around 10:30, there was a knock on our door. Marcus got up to answer it, and when he opened the door, Lenny Hayes was standing there. My body went tense immediately. We hadn't seen Lenny in almost 2 weeks, not since their confrontation outside the library. He'd been avoiding us completely. And honestly, I thought maybe he'd dropped out or transferred to another dorm. But there he was, looking nervous and fidgety, his hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets. "Marcus," he said, his voice low, "can we talk? Outside?" Marcus glanced back at me, and I shook my head slightly, trying to tell him it wasn't a good idea. But Marcus, being Marcus, nodded and stepped out into the hallway. I sat up in bed, straining to hear their conversation through the door. Their voices were muffled, but I could tell it was tense. Lenny's voice would spike every few seconds, getting louder, more defensive. Marcus's voice stayed calm, controlled, but I could hear the edge in it. After about 5 minutes, the door opened and Marcus came back in. His face was tight, his shoulders tense. "What did he want?" I asked. Marcus closed the door and leaned against it, running his hands over his face. "He wants more time to pay me back. Says he's having money problems. Says he needs another month." I sat up fully now, anger flaring in my chest. "Another month? Marcus, he's never going to pay you back. You know that, right? This is just another game, another stalling tactic." Marcus nodded slowly. "I know. I told him I want the money by next week or I'm going to the dean. I'm done playing around." I'd never heard Marcus sound like that before. Hard, final, like he'd made a decision and wasn't backing down. Part of me was proud of him, but another part of me, a part I didn't understand yet, felt afraid. Around 11:30, I started getting ready for bed. I brushed my teeth in the communal bathroom down the hall, changed into my pajamas, and climbed under my covers. Marcus was still at his desk, hunched over his biology book, highlighting passages and taking notes. "You staying up late?" I asked him. He nodded without looking up. "Yeah, I need to get through 2 more chapters tonight. You go ahead and sleep. I'll try to keep the light low." I turned toward the wall, pulling my blanket up to my chin. The room was warm from the radiator, and I could hear the faint hum of Marcus's desk lamp and the scratch of his pen on paper. Outside, I heard voices in the hallway, other students heading to bed, doors opening and closing, the normal sounds of dorm life. I remember thinking how safe I felt in that moment, how lucky I was to be here in college with a good roommate and a future ahead of me. I remember thinking that everything was going to work out. I closed my eyes and drifted off, not knowing that those would be the last peaceful thoughts I'd have for a very long time. Somewhere around 2 or 3 in the morning, I don't know exactly when, I woke up to the sound of voices, not loud voices, but urgent ones. I kept my eyes closed, still half asleep, figuring it was just students in the hallway being too loud. But then I heard our door open, the creak of the hinges, the soft click of the latch. I should have opened my eyes then. I should have sat up and asked who was there. But I was so tired, so deep in that space between sleeping and waking, that I just assumed it was Marcus stepping out to use the bathroom or get some water. I heard footsteps, soft and deliberate. I heard breathing, quick and shallow, and then I heard something that made my blood run cold even in my half-conscious state. A voice, barely a whisper, but full of anger. "You should have just let it go." And then there was movement. Fast, violent movement. The sound of a struggle. Marcus's voice, suddenly awake and alert, saying, "Wait, what are you?" And then cut off. A thud. A gasp. The terrible wet sound of something sharp meeting flesh over and over and over. I opened my eyes and saw shadows moving in the darkness. Saw 2 figures struggling near Marcus's bed. Heard Marcus choking, gurgling, trying to breathe. And then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The door opened and closed. Footsteps ran down the hallway, and everything went silent except for one sound. Marcus trying to breathe, desperate and failing. I should have moved faster. I should have jumped up immediately. But fear paralyzed me for what felt like forever, but was probably only seconds. When I finally threw off my covers and stumbled toward Marcus's bed, I could barely see in the darkness. I reached for the light switch, and when the room flooded with brightness, I saw something I'll never unsee. Marcus was on the floor next to his bed, his white t-shirt soaked red, his eyes open and terrified, his hands pressed against his chest, trying to stop the blood. So much blood. It was everywhere, on the floor, on his sheets, pooling around him like something alive. And then I looked at my own hands and realized they were covered in it too. I'd knelt down next to him without even thinking. I touched him, tried to help him, and now his blood was all over me, all over my pajamas, all over my hands. And when the campus security broke down our door 60 seconds later, responding to screams I didn't even realize were coming from my own mouth, that's what they saw. Me, covered in my roommate's blood, shaking and crying and trying to explain that I didn't do it, that someone else was here, that I saw him leave. But nobody believed me. Nobody believed me at all. The next hours blurred together like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Campus security pulled me out of the room while EMTs rushed in to try to save Marcus, but I already knew it was too late. I'd seen his eyes. I'd watched the light go out of them. They made me sit in the hallway, still in my blood-soaked pajamas, while students poured out of their rooms asking what happened, crying, pointing at me. Someone was screaming, "Oh my God, Marcus is dead! Marcus is dead!" And then the Atlanta Police Department arrived. 3 officers in dark blue uniforms looking at me like I was already guilty. They didn't ask me if I was okay. They didn't ask me if I needed anything. They just asked, "What happened in there?" And when I tried to explain, when I tried to tell them that someone came into our room and attacked Marcus while I was sleeping, one of them looked at the other and I saw it, that look. That look that said they'd already made up their minds about what happened. They took me to the police station downtown, still in my pajamas, still covered in Marcus's blood. They put me in a cold, white interrogation room with a metal table and 2 chairs, and they left me there for what felt like hours. I was shaking so hard I thought my bones might break. I kept seeing Marcus's face, kept hearing that wet, choking sound he made trying to breathe. I wanted my mama. I wanted to call her and tell her to come get me, to tell her this was all a mistake and I'd be home soon. But they wouldn't let me call anyone. Not yet. First, they wanted answers. Detective Raymond Harper walked in around 6 a.m. He was a white man in his 50s with gray hair and tired eyes, wearing a brown suit that looked like he'd slept in it. He sat down across from me and placed a folder on the table. He didn't introduce himself. He just started talking. "Vernon," he said, his voice flat and emotionless, "I'm going to be straight with you. This doesn't look good for you. Your roommate is dead, stabbed 7 times in the chest and abdomen, and you were the only other person in that room. Your hands are covered in his blood. Your pajamas are covered in his blood. And you're telling me some mysterious person came in, killed him, and ran away, and you just happened to sleep through most of it?" I tried to keep my voice steady, but it came out broken, desperate. I didn't sleep through it. I woke up. I heard them fighting. I saw someone leave, but it was dark. I couldn't see who it was. Detective Harper leaned back in his chair and folded his arms. "So you saw someone, but you can't tell me who. You heard voices, but you can't describe them. You expect me to believe that?" I wanted to scream at him that I was telling the truth, that I had no reason to hurt Marcus, that Marcus was my friend. But I was 19 years old, scared out of my mind, and I didn't know my rights. I didn't know I could ask for a lawyer. I didn't know I could refuse to answer. So I just kept talking, kept trying to explain, kept digging myself deeper into a hole I didn't even know I was in. They questioned me for 6 hours straight, different officers cycling in and out, asking me the same questions over and over in slightly different ways. Why would someone want to kill Marcus? Did you two fight about anything? Were you jealous of him? Did he have something you wanted? Were you in debt to him? Did he owe you money? Every question felt like a trap. Every answer I gave seemed to make them more suspicious. I told them about Lenny Hayes. I told them Marcus had lent him money, and Lenny refused to pay it back. I told them about the confrontation, about the new car, about Lenny showing up at our door just hours before Marcus was killed. But Detective Harper just wrote it all down with a skeptical look on his face, like I was making up a convenient story to shift blame. "So you're saying this Lenny character killed your roommate over $100? He asked, his voice dripping with disbelief. "People kill each other over less," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Detective Harper closed his notebook. "Or maybe you and Marcus had a fight. Maybe he said something that set you off. Maybe you grabbed a knife and things got out of hand. Maybe you didn't mean to kill him, Vernon. If that's what happened, it would be better to just admit it now." I felt something break inside me then. A part of me that believed the truth would win, that being honest and cooperative would somehow protect me. I looked Detective Harper in his tired, skeptical eyes and I said, "I didn't kill Marcus Wellington. I would never hurt him. He was my friend, my best friend, and if you don't believe me, then I want a lawyer." That's when everything changed. Detective Harper's face went from skeptical to cold. He stood up, grabbed his folder, and walked to the door. Before he left, He turned back and said, "You're going to need more than a lawyer, son. You're going to need a miracle." They arrested me officially at 2 p.m. that afternoon, charged me with first-degree murder, read me my rights like I was hearing them from underwater, put me in handcuffs again and took my mugshot and fingerprints. They let me make one phone call, and I called my mama. When she answered, her voice bright and cheerful, because she didn't know yet, I broke down completely. "Mama," I said, crying so hard I could barely breathe, "they're saying I killed Marcus. They're saying I murdered him. But I didn't. I swear to God I didn't." I heard her gasp on the other end of the line, heard her start praying immediately, calling on Jesus to protect her baby. But prayers weren't going to save me from what was coming. Nothing was. They assigned me a public defender named Thomas Mitchell. He was a young white lawyer, maybe 28 years old, fresh out of law school, with idealistic eyes and a briefcase that still had the price tag on it. He came to see me in the county jail 3 days after my arrest, and I remember thinking he looked more scared than I felt. We met in a small room with concrete walls and a table bolted to the floor. I was wearing an orange jumpsuit that was 2 sizes too big, and my wrists hurt from the handcuffs they made me wear everywhere. Mr. Mitchell sat down across from me, pulled out a yellow legal pad, and said the words that made my stomach drop. "Vernon, I'm going to be honest with you. This case is going to be very difficult to win." I just stared at him. "But I didn't do it," I said, my voice cracking. "I know what you told the police," he said, flipping through his notes, "but the evidence doesn't support your story. There were no signs of forced entry, no fingerprints except yours and Marcus's. No weapon found anywhere except in the trash chute, wiped clean, and you were found covered in the victim's blood." I wanted to grab him by his shoulders and shake him. I wanted to make him understand that evidence can lie when you don't have all the pieces. "What about Lenny Hayes?" I asked. "Did you talk to him? Did the police even question him?" Mr. Mitchell nodded slowly. "They did. He has an alibi. He was at an off-campus party that night with about 20 witnesses who say he never left. He didn't get back to his dorm until almost 4 in the morning." The room started spinning. An alibi. Lenny had an alibi, which meant either those 20 people were lying, or Lenny had planned this so carefully that he'd made sure everyone would remember seeing him somewhere else. "He set me up," I whispered, more to myself than to Mr. Mitchell. "He killed Marcus, and he set me up." My lawyer looked at me with something like pity in his eyes. "Vernon, I know you're scared. I know this seems impossible, but we need to focus on building a defense based on what we can prove, not what we think happened. Right now, the prosecution has a strong case, and we need to be realistic about that." The trial started on February 14th, 1972, Valentine's Day. I remember because there were red and pink decorations in some of the shops we passed on the way to the courthouse. Love everywhere. And I was about to be tried for murder. The Fulton County Courthouse was this massive building with white columns and marble floors that echoed with every footstep. They walked me in through a side entrance so the reporters and protesters couldn't get to me. Yes, protesters. By then, my story had made the local news. Morehouse student kills roommate. And people had already decided I was guilty. Some people from Marcus's church had organized a protest outside the courthouse, holding signs that said "Justice for Marcus" and "Death penalty for killers." I saw Marcus's parents there too, standing with the church group, his mother sobbing into his father's shoulder. I wanted to tell them I didn't do it. I wanted to scream it so loud the whole city could hear. But the guards just pushed me forward, through the metal detectors, up the stairs, into the courtroom, where my fate would be decided. The prosecution was led by District Attorney Patricia Coleman, a black woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a voice that could cut through steel. She was known for being tough on crime, and she made it very clear from her opening statement that she believed I was guilty and she was going to prove it. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she said, pacing in front of them in her navy blue suit, "this is a case about betrayal. About a young man named Vernon Carter who lived 3 feet away from Marcus Wellington, who ate with him, studied with him, and then in the middle of the night took a knife and stabbed him 7 times. 7 times. While Marcus begged for his life. And then Vernon Carter had the audacity to play the victim, to cover himself in his friend's blood and pretend someone else did it. But the evidence will show you the truth. There was no mysterious intruder. There was no unknown killer. There was only Vernon Carter, alone in that room with Marcus Wellington, and when the sun came up, one of them was dead. I watched the jury as she spoke. 12 people, 8 black, 4 white, all staring at me like I was already convicted, and I felt something I'd never felt before in my life, completely and utterly alone. The prosecution spent 3 days laying out their case. They brought in the medical examiner, who described Marcus's wounds in graphic detail, the trajectory of the knife, the depth of the cuts, the fact that Marcus had defensive wounds on his hands, which meant he fought back. They brought in the crime scene investigators, who showed photographs of our room, of the blood, of my pajamas, of my handprints on Marcus's body where I tried to help him. They brought in students from our dorm, who testified that they'd never seen anyone else go into our room that night, that the hallway was quiet, that they heard screaming, and when they came out, they saw me covered in blood. And then they brought in Detective Harper, who sat on the stand in his brown suit and testified that I had no credible explanation for what happened, that my story kept changing, that I seemed more concerned with protecting myself than grieving my roommate. Every word felt like a nail in my coffin. Mr. Mitchell tried his best during cross-examination. He pointed out that there was no motive. Marcus and I had no history of violence, no major disagreements, no reason for me to hurt him. He brought up Lenny Hayes and the money Marcus had lent him, trying to suggest that someone else had a reason to want Marcus dead. But when Lenny took the stand, he was calm, composed, almost sympathetic. He admitted he'd borrowed money from Marcus and hadn't paid it back yet, but he said he was planning to pay him after Christmas when he got money from his family. "I feel terrible about what happened to Marcus," Lenny said, his voice thick with fake emotion. "He was a good guy. He didn't deserve this, and I can't believe Vernon is trying to blame me just to save himself." The jury ate it up. They looked at Lenny like he was the grieving friend, and looked at me like I was the monster trying to drag an innocent person down with me. And that's when I knew. I knew I was going to lose. I knew the truth didn't matter. I knew that in the eyes of these 12 people, I was already guilty, and nothing my lawyer said was going to change their minds. The jury deliberated for 4 hours, 4 hours to decide whether I would spend the rest of my life in prison or walk free. When they came back, the forewoman stood up, a middle-aged black woman who looked at me with disgust the entire trial, and read the verdict in a clear, firm voice. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Vernon James Carter, guilty of murder in the first degree." The courtroom erupted. Marcus's mother let out a wail that sounded like it came from somewhere deep in the earth. People were crying, hugging, thanking God for justice. And I just sat there, numb, feeling like I was watching this happen to someone else. Mr. Mitchell put his hand on my shoulder, but I couldn't feel it. I couldn't feel anything. The judge set sentencing for 2 weeks later, and the guards came to take me away. As they led me out of the courtroom in handcuffs, I looked back one last time and saw Lenny Hayes sitting in the back row. He wasn't crying like everyone else. He wasn't celebrating. He was just sitting there staring at me, and for just a second, just one brief second, I saw it. A smile. Small, barely there but real. He'd won. He'd killed Marcus, framed me, and gotten away with it, and there wasn't a damn thing I could do about it. They sentenced me to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. 25 years. I was 19 years old. I'd be 44 before I even had a chance of getting out. And that was only if I behaved perfectly, if I played by all their rules, if I became the model prisoner they wanted me to be. When the judge read my sentence, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I just stood there and took it. Because what else could I do? My mama was in the courtroom that day, sitting in the back with my little sister Rosetta, who was only 12 years old. I saw Mama's face when the judge said life in prison, saw her hand fly to her mouth, saw her body fold in on itself like someone had punched her in the stomach. That hurt worse than anything the judge could say to me. Worse than the handcuffs, worse than the orange jumpsuit, worse than knowing I'd be locked in a cage for something I didn't do. I'd broken my mama's heart. I'd destroyed the dream she'd worked double shifts to make possible, and there was nothing I could do to fix it. They transferred me to Georgia State Prison in Reedsville 3 weeks later. It's about 200 miles southeast of Atlanta, in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by swamps and pine trees and silence. The kind of silence that makes you realize how alone you really are. The bus ride there took 4 hours, shackled to 9 other men who were also starting long sentences. Nobody talked much. What was there to say? We all knew what waited for us at the end of that ride. When we pulled through those prison gates, when I saw those high concrete walls topped with razor wire, when I heard the gate slam shut behind us with a sound like thunder, something inside me broke. Not the part that made me human. I held on to that for as long as I could. But the part that believed things would get better. The part that believed justice would eventually win. That part died on the spot, and I felt it leave my body like a ghost. Prison is its own world with its own rules, and you either learn them fast or you don't survive. The guards don't care if you're innocent. The other inmates don't care if you were framed. All that matters is what you're willing to do to protect yourself, how hard you can be, how much you can endure without breaking completely. They put me in a cell block with about 50 other men, most of them violent offenders, most of them hardened by years of abuse and neglect and rage they couldn't express anywhere else. My cellmate was a man named Clarence who was serving 15 years for armed robbery. He was in his 40s, covered in scars and tattoos, with eyes that had seen too much. The first thing he said to me when I walked into our cell was, "You innocent or guilty?" I looked at him trying to figure out if this was a trick question. "Innocent," I said. Clarence nodded like he'd heard that before. "Don't matter in here. Innocent, guilty. We all bleed the same. Just keep your head down, don't start nothing, and you might make it out alive." That was the closest thing to kindness I received in my first year. The days blurred together into a rhythm of survival. Wake up at 5:30 a.m., breakfast at 6, watery grits, stale bread, coffee that tasted like dirt. Work detail from 7 to 3. I was assigned to the laundry, folding sheets and towels that smelled like bleach and despair. Lunch at noon, mystery meat, canned vegetables, more stale bread. Back to work until 3. Dinner at 5. 1 hour of recreation time in the yard if you were lucky. Lights out at 9. And then you'd lie in your bunk in the darkness, listening to men crying, men fighting, men slowly losing their minds. I wrote letters to my mama every week, trying to sound hopeful, trying to tell her I was okay even though I wasn't. She wrote back faithfully, telling me about Rosetta's school, about the church, about Birmingham, about a world that felt further away than the moon. She never stopped believing I was innocent. She told me that in every letter. "I know my son," she wrote. "I know your heart, and God knows the truth. Hold on, Vernon, just hold on." But holding on got harder with each passing year. By the time I'd been in prison for 5 years, I'd stopped counting days. Time didn't work the same way in there. Days became weeks, became months, became years, all bleeding into one long, gray existence. I'd survived 3 fights, one because someone thought I looked at them wrong, one because someone tried to steal my food, one because I was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. I had a scar across my ribs from a shank someone made out of a sharpened toothbrush. I had nightmares every night about Marcus dying, about Lenny's smile, about the jury saying guilty. I'd filed 2 appeals through different lawyers Mama had scraped together money to hire. Both appeals were denied. The court said there was no new evidence, no reason to overturn the conviction. The system didn't care that I was innocent. The system just cared that the case was closed. By year 10, I'd become someone I didn't recognize. Harder, colder, angrier. I'd learned to fight properly, learned where to hit someone to make them think twice about messing with you. I'd learned to keep my emotions locked away where they couldn't be used against me. I'd learned to survive, but I'd forgotten how to live. Clarence had been released after serving his 15 years, and I got a new cellmate named Raymond who barely spoke. That was fine. I barely spoke either anymore. What was there to say? I'd stopped writing to Mama as often because I had nothing good to tell her. I'd stopped reading her letters sometimes because they hurt too much, reminding me of a world I wasn't part of anymore. I'd stopped believing I'd ever get out. 25 years felt like forever when you were living it minute by minute. And I started thinking maybe it would be easier to just give up. Maybe it would be easier to stop fighting, stop hoping, stop caring. Maybe it would be easier to just disappear. I was 34 years old when everything started to change. I'd been in prison for 15 years, more than half my life at that point. I'd stopped filing appeals. I'd stopped fighting. I'd resigned myself to the idea that I'd die in that place, that my name would never be cleared, that Lenny Hayes would go to his grave never paying for what he did. But here's what I've learned. Sometimes the truth has a way of crawling out of the grave you buried it in. Sometimes justice takes its time, but it doesn't forget. And sometimes the thing you stop believing in shows up exactly when you stop looking for it. It started with a letter. Not from Mama this time. She'd passed away 4 years earlier from lung cancer, and losing her had nearly destroyed what was left of me. This letter came from an attorney in Atlanta named Jessica Winters. I almost threw it away without opening it because I'd gotten so many letters from lawyers over the years promising they could help, only to find out they wanted money Mama didn't have. But something made me open this one. Dear Mr. Carter, it read. My name is Jessica Winters, and I'm an attorney with the Georgia Innocence Project. We are a nonprofit organization dedicated to exonerating wrongly convicted individuals through DNA testing and investigation of credible claims of innocence. Your case was brought to our attention by a former Morehouse College professor who has been researching wrongful convictions in Atlanta during the 1970s. After reviewing the trial transcripts and evidence from your case, we believe there are significant questions about your conviction that warrant further investigation. If you are interested in having our organization review your case, please respond to this letter. This review would be provided at no cost to you. I read that letter 5 times, my hands shaking so bad I could barely hold the paper. The Georgia Innocence Project. I'd heard about them. They'd gotten a few men out of prison over the years. Men who'd been locked up for decades for crimes they didn't commit. But I'd never thought they'd look at my case. I'd never thought anyone would care about a 19-year-old kid who got convicted of killing his roommate 34 years ago. I wrote back that same day. Within 2 weeks, Jessica Winters came to see me at the prison. She was a black woman in her 30s, wearing a gray suit and carrying a leather briefcase that looked expensive. When they brought me into the visiting room and I saw her sitting there, something in my chest that had been closed for 15 years cracked open just a little. She stood up when I walked in, shook my hand like I was a person and not a prisoner, and said, Mr. Carter, thank you for agreeing to meet with me. I've read everything about your case, and I have to tell you, I believe you're innocent. I sat down heavily in the chair across from her, and for the first time in years, I felt something that scared me more than anything else. Hope. Why? I asked, my voice rough from disuse. Why do you believe me? Jessica opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. Because the evidence doesn't add up. Because your story never changed. Because there was another suspect with clear motive who was never properly investigated. And because I've done this long enough to know the difference between a guilty man's lies and an innocent man's truth. Over the next 6 months, Jessica and her team tore my case apart and rebuilt it. They tracked down former students from Morehouse who'd been in our dorm that night and got new statements. They found inconsistencies in the police reports, things that had been overlooked or ignored. They discovered that the so-called alibi witnesses for Lenny Hayes, the people who said he was at a party that night, weren't as credible as the prosecution had made them seem. 3 of them had since recanted, saying they'd been pressured by police to say they saw Lenny all night, when in reality he'd left the party for about 2 hours and no one knew where he went. 2 hours. More than enough time to drive to campus, kill Marcus, and drive back. But the most important thing Jessica found was something nobody had bothered to check in 1972. Fingerprints on the knife. The murder weapon had been found in the trash chute on our floor, wiped mostly clean. But forensic technology had improved dramatically since then. Jessica filed a motion to have the knife retested using modern techniques And the judge, a different judge than the one who'd sentenced me, granted it. 4 months later, the results came back. There were partial fingerprints on the handle of the knife that the 1972 testing had missed. And when they ran those prints through the system, they got a match. Leonard Hayes. Lenny's fingerprints were on the murder weapon, the weapon he swore he'd never touched, the weapon that killed my best friend while I slept 3 feet away. When Jessica came to tell me, I didn't know whether to laugh or cry or scream, so I did all three. I sat in that visiting room and broke down like a child, 15 years of pain and rage and grief pouring out of me all at once. "We're going to get you out, Vernon," Jessica said, her own eyes wet. "This is enough. This is what we needed. We're filing for a new trial and a motion to dismiss the charges. It's going to take time, but we're going to get you out." But getting the evidence wasn't the same as getting justice. The district attorney's office fought back hard, arguing that the new fingerprint evidence was inconclusive, that Lenny could have touched the knife innocently at some point, that it didn't prove he killed Marcus. They brought up my original conviction, said the jury had heard all the evidence and made their decision. For 8 more months, Jessica fought them in court, filing motion after motion, arguing that I deserved a new trial at minimum. And then, just when I thought the system was going to fail me again, something happened that nobody saw coming. Lenny Hayes walked into an Atlanta police station on November 3rd, 2006, and confessed to everything. Just walked in at 2 in the afternoon, asked to speak to a detective, and told them the truth about what happened that night 34 years ago. He said he couldn't live with it anymore. He said the guilt had been eating him alive for decades. He said he needed to confess before he died. And then he told them exactly how he killed Marcus Wellington, exactly how he framed me, and exactly why he did it. I was in my cell when the guards came to get me. It was late afternoon, and I just finished my shift in the laundry. I was lying on my bunk, staring at the ceiling the way I'd done 10,000 times before, when I heard footsteps coming down the corridor. Heavy, official footsteps. When they stopped at my cell, I sat up, my heart pounding, because guards showing up unexpectedly usually meant something bad. But when the door opened, the guard's face wasn't hard like usual. He looked almost respectful. "Carter," he said, "you need to come with us. The warden wants to see you." The walk to the warden's office felt like walking through water. My legs wouldn't move right. My mind was racing through every possibility. Had I done something wrong? Was I being transferred to another prison? Had something happened to Rosetta? When they opened the door to the warden's office, I saw Jessica Winters sitting there, and next to her was a man in a suit I didn't recognize. The warden, a heavy-set white man named Robert Dawson, stood up from behind his desk and looked at me with an expression I'd never seen from him before. Remorse. "Mr. Carter," he said, and the fact that he called me Mr. instead of inmate or Carter made my skin prickle. "Please sit down." I sat, my eyes moving between Jessica and the stranger and the warden, trying to understand what was happening. "Vernon," Jessica said, reaching across to grip my hand, "Leonard Hayes confessed. 2 days ago, he walked into the Atlanta Police Department and confessed to murdering Marcus Wellington. He gave them details that only the real killer would know. He told them everything, about the money Marcus lent him, about their argument the night of the murder, about how he snuck into your room while you were sleeping and killed Marcus, while you were too disoriented to understand what was happening. He told them he wiped his prints off the knife, but must have missed some. He told them about setting up his alibi ahead of time, making sure people would remember seeing him at that party. He told them he's been living with the guilt for 34 years, and he can't do it anymore. Vernon, he confessed to everything. The room started spinning. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. The man in the suit leaned forward. "Mr. Carter, my name is David Morrison. I'm with the district attorney's office. Based on Mr. Hayes' confession and the corroborating forensic evidence Miss Winters' team uncovered, we are dropping all charges against you, effective immediately. The state of Georgia formally apologizes for this miscarriage of justice. You are a free man, free. I'd been in prison for 15 years, 4 months, and 17 days. I'd lost my youth. I'd lost my mama. I'd lost my future. I'd lost everything. And now this stranger in a suit was telling me I was free, like those 2 words could somehow erase what had been done to me. When? I managed to whisper. When do I get out? The warden answered. Today. Now. We'll process your release paperwork, return your personal belongings, and you can leave within the hour. An hour. 60 minutes between this cell and freedom. It didn't feel real. None of it felt real. They took me to processing, gave me the clothes I'd worn the day they transferred me here 15 years ago. They didn't fit anymore. I was thinner now, harder, and handed me a plastic bag with my belongings. A wallet with $3 in it, a broken watch, a photograph of Mama and Rosetta that had faded to almost nothing. That was all I had left from my old life. Jessica walked with me through the corridors, past cells where men I'd lived with for years stared at me like I was a ghost. Word had already spread somehow. Carter was getting out. They cleared his name. He was innocent all along. Some men congratulated me. Some looked angry, probably wondering why they couldn't get the same second chance. Some just looked sad, like seeing me leave reminded them they never would. When we reached the final gate, the one that led outside, I stopped walking. My legs wouldn't move. Vernon, Jessica said softly, are you okay? I shook my head. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be out there anymore. She squeezed my arm. One step at a time. That's all you have to do. One step at a time. The gate opened, and I walked through it into November sunlight that was so bright it hurt my eyes. The air smelled different out here. Clean, fresh, alive. I could hear birds singing somewhere. Real birds, not the ones you glimpse through razor wire. Cars driving on a highway in the distance. Normal sounds from a normal world that I'd been erased from. Jessica had arranged for a car to take me to a halfway house in Atlanta where I could stay while I figured out my next steps. On the drive there, I watched Georgia pass by through the window. Towns I didn't recognize, highways that were bigger than I remembered, buildings that hadn't existed when I went in. The world had changed. Technology had advanced. 15 years might not sound like forever, but it is when you're frozen in time and everything else keeps moving. When we pulled up to the halfway house, a small brick building in a quiet neighborhood, Jessica walked me inside and helped me check in. Vernon, she said before leaving, I know this is overwhelming. I know you're angry and confused and probably terrified, but you survived. You made it through. And now you get to decide what comes next. If you need anything, anything at all, you call me. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. She hugged me, and I stood there stiffly, not remembering how to hug someone back. That night, alone in a small room with a real bed and a window with no bars, I did something I hadn't done in 15 years. I cried. Not the angry, bitter tears I cried in prison, but deep, wrenching sobs that came from somewhere I'd forgotten existed. I cried for Marcus, who never got to live his dreams. I cried for Mama, who died believing I was innocent, but never got to see me free. I cried for the 19-year-old kid I'd been, the one who believed the system would protect him. I cried for the 34 years Lenny Hayes had stolen from me, and I cried because I was free, but I didn't know who I was anymore. Prison had taken the boy I'd been and turned him into someone else, someone harder, someone angrier, someone who didn't know how to trust or hope or believe in anything good. How was I supposed to live in the world as this person? How was I supposed to move forward when I couldn't stop looking back? I didn't have answers. I just knew that I'd survived. And for now, that would have to be enough. Adjusting to freedom was harder than I ever imagined. Everything felt too big, too fast, too overwhelming. The halfway house gave me structure for the first 6 months. Counseling, job training, help finding employment. But the world I walked back into wasn't the world I'd left. It was 2006, not 1971. People had cell phones and computers and the internet. Jobs required skills I didn't have. And everywhere I went, I felt like people could see ex-convict written on my forehead, even though I'd been exonerated. The stigma didn't care about innocence. I'd been in prison, and that was all most people needed to know to decide who I was. I got a job washing dishes at a restaurant in downtown Atlanta. The pay was minimum wage and the work was hard, but it was honest and it kept me busy. kept my mind from wandering to dark places. At night, I'd go back to the halfway house and sit in my room, trying to figure out what to do with the anger that lived inside me like a second heartbeat. Lenny Hayes was arrested and charged with Marcus's murder 2 days after his confession. The trial was fast. He'd confessed, the evidence supported it, there wasn't much to argue about. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge said what he'd done, not just killing Marcus, but framing an innocent person and letting them rot in prison for 15 years, showed a level of depravity that deserved the harshest punishment. I went to the sentencing, sat in the back of the courtroom, and watched Lenny stand there in handcuffs, his head down, looking 20 years older than his age. He was 53 now, overweight, his hair gone gray. He didn't look like the cocky kid I remembered. He looked broken, defeated. When the judge asked if he had anything to say, Lenny turned around and looked right at me. Our eyes met for the first time in 34 years. "Vernon," he said, his voice shaking, "I'm sorry. I know that doesn't mean anything. I know sorry doesn't give you back what I took. But I need you to know, I've been in my own prison all these years. Every day I thought about what I did. Every day I wanted to confess, but I was too scared, too selfish. And now you're free and I'm going to die in prison, and I deserve it. I deserve every second of it. I'm sorry." The courtroom was silent, everyone waiting to see what I'd do, what I'd say. I stood up slowly and walked to the railing that separated the gallery from the defendant's table. I looked at Lenny, really looked at him, and I felt nothing, not forgiveness, not hatred, just nothing. "You took 15 years from me," I said quietly. "You took my friend, you took my mama's peace before she died. You took my future, and you're right, sorry don't mean nothing. You're going to have to live with what you did, just like I have to live with what it turned me into. I hope that eats at you every single day." I turned and walked out before he could respond. I didn't need to hear anything else. I didn't need closure from him. The only closure I needed was the kind I had to give myself. The Georgia Innocence Project helped me file a wrongful conviction lawsuit against the state. It took 3 years, but eventually we settled. The state agreed to pay me compensation, not enough to replace what I'd lost, but enough to start over. Enough to buy a small house in Oakland, California, where my sister Rosetta had moved years ago with her family. Enough to not have to wash dishes for minimum wage anymore. Enough to breathe. Rosetta and I reconnected slowly. She was 46 by then, married with 3 kids of her own. She'd visited me a few times in prison over the years, but it had been hard for her, seeing her big brother in that place, knowing he was innocent, feeling helpless to change it. But now I was out, and she welcomed me into her life without hesitation. Introduced me to her kids, my nephew and 2 nieces, who called me Uncle Vernon, and didn't see an ex-convict when they looked at me. They just saw family, and slowly, very slowly, I started to remember what that felt like. I started going to therapy, a black woman named Dr. Patricia Holmes who specialized in trauma and reentry. At first, I resisted it. I didn't want to talk about what I'd been through, didn't want to relive it. But Dr. Holmes was patient. She didn't push. She just created a space where I could be honest about the anger, the fear, the nightmares that still woke me up at 3 a.m. She helped me understand that what happened to me wasn't just about lost time, it was about lost identity. I'd gone into prison as a boy with dreams, and I'd come out as a man who'd forgotten how to dream. And if I wanted to really be free, I had to learn how to hope again, how to trust again, how to be vulnerable again. It took years. I'm still working on it, but I'm better than I was. I can laugh now sometimes. I can talk about mama without breaking down. I can look at young black men on college campuses and feel pride instead of grief. I can breathe without feeling like there's a weight on my chest. That's progress. That's healing. It's slow, but it's real. In 2015, almost 10 years after my release, I did something I never thought I'd be able to do. I went back to Morehouse College. Not as a student. I was 63 years old by then, too old to finish the degree I'd started at 19. But the college had invited me to speak at a justice reform symposium they were hosting. When I walked onto that campus for the first time in 44 years, I felt Marcus with me. I swear I could feel him walking beside me, smiling that easy smile, telling me he was proud. They'd put up a memorial for him years ago, a bench under a tree with a plaque that read Marcus Wellington 1951 to 1971, a life of promise, gone too soon. I sat on that bench for a long time before my speech, talking to Marcus like he could hear me, telling him I was sorry it took so long, sorry I couldn't save him, sorry the world failed both of us. And then I thanked him for being my friend, for being good when the world was cruel, for teaching me, even in death, that kindness matters, that truth matters, that some things are worth fighting for even when you're tired of fighting. I don't know if Marcus would forgive me for surviving when he didn't. I don't know if Mama, watching from wherever she is now, thinks I've made peace with what happened. But I know this. I'm still here. I made it through. I'm 73 years old now, sitting in my house in Oakland with my granddaughter's kids playing in the next room, and I'm still here. The system tried to break me. Lenny Hayes tried to erase me. The world tried to forget me. But I survived. And that means something. It has to mean something. I tell my story not because I want pity or because I think I'm special. I tell it because somewhere out there, someone needs to hear that you can lose everything and still find reasons to keep going. You can be buried alive by injustice and still claw your way back to the surface. You can be broken and still heal, even if the cracks never completely disappear. If you've made it this far with me, if you've listened to this old man pour out the most painful chapter of his life, then I want to say thank you. Thank you for believing me. Thank you for seeing me as more than a case number or a statistic. Thank you for letting me be human. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. Tell me if my story meant something to you. Tell me if it changed how you see the world, even just a little bit. Because that's why I'm still here. That's why I survived. Not just to be free, but to remind people that behind every wrongful conviction, every injustice, every life destroyed by a system that's supposed to protect us, there's a real person. A person with dreams and family and a future that got stolen. I can't get those 15 years back. I can't bring Marcus back. I can't undo what Lenny Hayes did or make the state apologize properly for what they did to me. But I can stand here, still breathing, still fighting, still believing that truth matters. And as long as I'm alive, I'll keep telling this story. Because Marcus deserves to be remembered. Because Mama deserves to know her faith in me wasn't wasted. And because that 19-year-old kid who walked into room 214 at Harrison Hall in 1970 with 2 suitcases and a head full of dreams, he deserves to finally rest in peace. I made it, Mama. I made it through, and I found peace in the pieces they left behind. That's my story. That's my truth, and I'm free.